So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, it's always important understanding the scripture, because not very many people these days are truly studying the spiritual aspects of the original manuscripts. And unfortunately, these days where then people are most often not taking the time in studying these holy manuscripts, then the situation in the world becomes even more critical. The reason why, it's because the creation itself, as explained by the Hamashiach ben Yosef, explains direct relation with a person's responsibilities and each soul responsible for understanding the manuscripts. Now, the spiritual world of this time is contaminated, and people try to weasel themselves, and they simply do not want to study. However, at the end of the journey of this life, then comes judged, past tense. So the Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining areas of the spiritual understanding requiring absolute study of these holy manuscripts, and unfortunately our nation has deviated so badly from the original manuscripts, and today we find then our country going through financial troubles and has picked a fight again with the Soviets. This country has obviously sent out 35 Soviet diplomats, in indicating the absolute certainty of Daniel the 11th chapter. So then, because of this situation and the precise understanding of the Hamashiach ben Yosef, we find then the 11th chapter of Daniel, and precisely related with the section of the kingdom of the north, later on coming with a great army and much equipment. Now, there are some situations related with Yashurum, the Holy Land, and the link with this country and the Palestinian state. Now, are there any information pertinent or some types of information that can be related with the demise of the political and military influence of this country? And it does. So then, when we read the ships of Kitim later on, there is an understanding of then the Soviet Union returning and becoming the great military power of this world. Now, there are the steps of formation related with this understanding from Yeshayahu, also Daniel, also Ezekiel, and the wishes of this country is no longer in the hands of the New World Order. And this particular period of time has ended. Now comes the understanding of the transitional sections of the instructions. Now, people do no longer have the leisure of understanding the scripture on their own, coming up with stories, or inventing, or manipulating, or trying to understand on their own as if they had some sort of a scripture invented of their own. And there are many portions of the scriptures that were invented Now with the problem with the Soviets, and then truly, absolutely certainly, the section related with the Northern Kingdom, and later on coming with a great army and much equipment, gives us a few clues of what awaiting in this country related with the economy and the military. Now, these scriptures are not mine. This scripture, they are not from the people. This scripture is from the divine. Now, people have a tendency, because of their ignorance, of projecting responsibility on other people when they themselves don't understand these instructions were given by the divine. So then destroying people, murdering people, hurting people won't change the instructions, neither the transitional time. The holy Yahweh, Gibor, has set the end of time in a certain way, and no person can change it. So then, during the time of Yeshayahu, he was obviously murdered by his own people, and then the Hamashiach ben Yosef later on reminded the instructions and the prophecies that were absolutely true. And now this country is trying, through the new government, come up with some sort of ideas of their own, and trying to regain absolutely total power in the world. And the government won't. Now, there is a portion related with Africa. The only link of survival of this country is linking up with the region spoken of by Yeshayahu the prophet, and the region beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Now then, the Holy Land is in a position of embargo. Whatsoever Yeshurun was thinking, Jerusalem was thinking, and populating the land, it's absolutely halted. Now this truly gives us an indicator that the people won't be able to get what they wish. There are the steps of formation of the time of the restoration period, and this restoration period does not belong during the time of the New World Order. Now, lots of portions of the translated scripture were blunt lies because they did not understand what they were translating. It became a tradition. However, traditions does not save the soul. That's why then Shaliach Shimon has said each person is responsible for the salvation of his or her own soul, because there is a maintenance that must be maintained by reading the scripture. Now then, as far as Daniel the prophet, he was explaining structurings of this period of time, and also the ultimate autumn feast. Now our nation won't be able to recuperate in the next 40 years. In fact, the contrary. The economy is going to go down until the regions of Africa beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, mostly the Congo area, is then organized. So then the reason why people cannot link with it, because they don't study. There was a period of 1,000 years the scripture were invented and made traditions out of it. Now people were so indoctrinated in such a wrong way, and then when the truth is explained, they can't link because they were never exposed to the original manuscripts. However, the desire of the divine is in a certain way explained by the prophets, and it won't change. So then, Daniel is explaining. There are sections of these that later on is explaining a link with Africa and then the re-wealthing of the country. However, there is a military withdrawal from the world because of economical troubles. Now, not every layer explained in the Holy Scripture is chronological. Not a particular prophet is giving the order of events in a chronological way. There are prophets that they explain from A to Z, for instance, A, B, C, F, and the other prophet explains D. So when a person does not take the time to study, they think, reading Daniel, okay, this is what's going to take place, this, and this. No, it's not. And in fact, there are events taking place that's not even in a regular scripture. And some of these are crucial for the understanding of the transitional time and the restoration. So this country won't become a military power as it was before, because the scripture is saying so. Now, if the scriptures were from the people, for the people, on behalf of the people, then people could manipulate. But when the divine is explaining, then it cannot. So then, after the re-wealthing of the country, then comes the withdrawal of most of the military from around the world. And then the Soviets and the Chinese, obviously the Kingdom of the North, the Kingdom of the East, then simply taking on the responsibilities of the international waters. Plus many links with the pathway from the area of the Holy Land until reaches China. So then, as the Gregorian New Year is simply around the corner, we find in the scriptures more alive than ever. So there are wishes from the people in what they believe as their own God. But the true understanding of tabernacling is in Ethiopia and in Sudan. So the Palestinians at the moment, they're in a very important position, because Revelation explains the courtyard was granted for the Gentiles. Now, it's not a bad term. In fact, the whole land later on, the Arabs are obviously taking over the land. Now, where do we find these? Very importantly, in Daniel the 11th chapter and also Yeshayahu. Now, a person doesn't have to be a military genius to understand the flow of events. And truly, ISIL is organizing itself, and they shall gather in Egypt. So the whole strengthening of the Arab world comes from ISIL. Now, it's not a fighting force against other nations. It's a simple completion of a prophecy. Now, it's indicating they are going to civilize themselves, and they are going to become very highly organized. That's why Egypt is building a new capital. The similarities and understandings of these particular layers are so striking. And Daniel explains on the 8th verse of the 11th chapter, is speaking of Egypt or Mitzrayim. So when a person doesn't understand the original manuscript and study Hebrew, they simply read paragraphs and phrases that they don't understand because they are involved with spiritual, dark, and confused world. Now, a person with a minimum of understanding simply can read international information, international news, and make a reference with the scripture. But the people simply, they are so indoctrinated for so many centuries. They think their manipulative God is going to do what they want. No. Egypt or Mitzrayim is becoming this powerful force within the Arab world then is organized. And as per the instructions of Yeshayahu, our economy is 100% and must be linked with Africa. It's the only hope of survival of our economy. In any country, when there are troubles with the finances, then he must cut back the expenses. Now, our government has given 38 times 12 digits as military help for the Holy Land. Now, our own military don't have this much money yet. We are giving away, so much. So truly is explaining the important focus of Ethiopia and Sudan, the region where used to be the Kingdom of Ethiopia. At the moment, the Holy Land is on standby. So then, these holy instructions are obviously given for our instructions, not Yod-Heh-Vav his instructions. Nobody is doing a favor for the divine. This scripture is for the people so they understand where they are at. Europe is going through a very hard time, and France wants to get out of the European Union. The economy of Europe is going down. The Chinese already went there and helped them because they cannot organize themselves. But not only this, there are religious aspects also going on in Europe. But the main point is understanding the importance of the Northern Kingdom. Now our nation has picked a fight against them, and the Soviet Union shall win. Now the point is, the withdrawal of our forces is not because of a lack of capability. It's because China has chosen the Soviet Union. There are the steps of formation as far as Babylon when became the most important power of its time. But there is a promise related if we link up and organize the area of Congo. Great time for the studies and understanding the Holy Scripture. Later on, I'll explain more of these in the enlightenment of Daniel and Ezekiel. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.